Hello there, you're watching COVID 360. I'm Sneha Mordani. Today we will tell you what exactly is pre-qualification from the World Health Organization. Why is it needed for vaccines? We will also tell you about India's possible third wave and why is it unlikely that children will be worst hit. No reason that children will be worst hit. There is no reason to believe this is what India's top scientist is telling us. That interview and much more up ahead on the show. First up, vaccine passports by way of WHO pre-qualification. Covaxin developers say it is a myth and that pre-qualification is required only for wider acceptability of the vaccine outside India. The government of India also says this is being decided, no decision just yet. The WHO has not arrived at a consensus. But what exactly is WHO pre-qualification and why is it imperative? Take a look. India's Bharat Biotech has submitted data to the World Health Organization for pre-qualification. But the company has insisted that it is not a requirement for a vaccine passport. Company sources, while speaking to India Today, have said that there is not a single country that has said that any Indian using Covaxin will not get to enter their shores till the time the vaccine gets a pre-qualification. The government of India says the same.
इसके ऊपर डिस्कशन चल रहा है कि क्या वैक्सीन को जो लोग वैक्सीनेटेड हैं हम उनको कंफर्म मानते हुए उनको अलाउ करें। अभी भी वर्ल्ड लेवल पर WHO गाइडेंस है या जो जितने देशों की गाइडेंस है वह केवल टेस्टिंग कि अगर आप नेगेटिव कोविड टेस्ट लेके आते हैं तब उसके बेसिस पर है।
As Bharat Biotech awaits emergency use approval from the World Health Organization for COVID-19, the company has said it hopes to get Covaxin on the World Health Organization's emergency use listing by the 3rd or 4th quarter of this year. In a statement, Bharat Biotech International Limited said application for EUL has been submitted to WHO Geneva. Regulatory approvals are expected July-September 2021. Most countries recommend vaccinations against COVID-19. Unvaccinated travelers can travel with negative RT-PCR tests prior to travel in the absence of any country-specific travel restrictions.
It is important for the vaccine to obtain pre-qualification from the World Health Organization. This also probably expands the manufacturer's capacity to export to many other countries apart from just India.
Pre-qualification is a procedure adopted by the World Health Organization to ensure supply of quality assured products. It has its origins in the expanded program of immunization, which had started globally in 1974. If a country wants to purchase, it was neither feasible nor affordable for every country to verify the quality of the vaccine produced. Therefore, member states mandated the World Health Organization to start an initiative to certify that a product met agreed international standards in quality, safety and efficacy.
The WHO stamp of approval of Covaxin is an important step in the global recognition of the effectiveness of this vaccine. It will give India and the other countries the confidence to vaccinate its people widely, not just this year, but also in the years to come. Also, Covaxin is probably the cheapest vaccine available, and the recognition of its effectiveness means it could actually become the main global COVID vaccine in the long term.
Experts believe that eventually Covaxin, like all other vaccines, will require pre-qualification, not just for global acceptance, but also from the point of view of vaccine passports, though the Government of India and the World Health Organization say that there is nothing decided on that front. Right now, the priority seems to be access to global markets and also acceptability to other countries for Covaxin's makers. In New Delhi, Sneha Mordani for India Today. Well, the third wave of COVID-19 in India, is it inevitable? Perhaps yes. But how much of this can be cushioned depends on us completely, is what experts are saying. I spoke to a couple of public health experts about what needs to be done next as we recover from the second wave and brace for the third. As we see a decline in the second wave of cases, a third wave, according to a mathematical projection by the National Supermodel Committee, looks possible. Scientists have warned against it.
We can expect, let's say, till September, October, people to retain their immunity. So first observation we can make is that the third wave is not going to come before that. If our vaccination pace covers up for that, and so that the percentage of immune population remains reasonably high, then the third wave's impact will be very localized.
The government too has said it will happen.
The phase 3 is inevitable, given the high levels of circulating virus. But it's not clear on what time scale this phase 3 will occur. Hopefully, incrementally, but we should prepare for new waves.
But medical experts and epidemiologists say the government can avert future disasters only by investing in healthcare workers and public health. India's response to COVID has been tripled by an acute shortage of medical staff, doctors, nurses, paramedics, and technicians. The country has 37.6 healthcare workers for every 10,000 people. The World Health Organization's benchmark is a minimum of 44.5. At 562, India has the highest number of medical colleges in the world. But given our 1.3 billion population, the doctor-patient ratio is abysmal. 9 doctors per 10,000 people, as against 42 in Germany, 28 in the UK, and 26 in the US. There are only 15 nurses for every 10,000 individuals. The UK has 150, Germany 132, the US has 85, China has 23. China, which is more populated than us, has 3.61 million doctors, nearly thrice that of India.
All the vacancies of frontline workers who are instrumental in doing the earlier actions in terms of testing, contact tracing, and also for actions including clinical care. This time we should not have any excuse for not preparing for multiple waves.
Experts say surveillance is also the key.
In order to prepare for aggressive containment, we need to have a really strong and proactive surveillance system. This can be done only by expanding the surveillance system's reach and also capacity in terms of identifying cases as early as possible. The moment we identify such clusters, we should be investigating it and preventing it from further spread.
Vaccination is our weapon to minimize the adversities of a third wave. The speed of vaccination should increase many folds to reach at least 10 million doses per day over the next few months.
We need to vaccinate as many people as we can before any sort of third wave hits us. The more we vaccinate, the better prepared we are.
Also, involvement of the private sector to handle the crisis, increased bed capacity and better resources, the paucity of which saw India collapse during the peak of the wave. The government says a lot depends on the people and we can have the situation under control even if the mutating virus keeps us on the edge.
Given the variant, given the reduced protection from vaccination, good protection against severe disease, but not full protection against infection, and enough number of unvaccinated people in every country, I believe outbreaks is a reality that everybody has to be on guard against.
This is an opportunity for governments to build strong and resilient healthcare systems. This pandemic, especially the second wave, has exposed India's dismal healthcare system completely. The need of the hour is to invest in India's healthcare structure, the system, increase spending on healthcare. Clearly, radical solutions are required. In New Delhi, Sneha Mordani for India Today. I spoke earlier to India's top scientist who says there is no reason to believe that the third wave will impact children more. Listen into this exclusive conversation with Dr. Anurag Agarwal, the director of the Institute of Genomics and Integrative Biology. There are several predictions and projections that have been made about a possible third wave of this infection in the country. Just do tell me, how probable is that? How possible is that? And also, this widespread belief that children could be worst affected.
Thank you very much for having me here. Let me try to clarify some things regarding what was meant when we spoke about the third wave. What we meant is that we should not imagine that this wave is the last wave. It is unlikely, given the scale of the infections, that we will see no further waves in the future. And I think another thing that got taken out of context was about children in the third wave. What I believe my colleagues were implying was simply the following. As vaccination protects more and more older people, and as we open up schools and colleges and get back to life, there'll be a higher proportion of younger children infected. It was never meant to imply that we will see a huge wave of severely ill children. So when we talk about what we see going forward, we see that this virus, this is not the last that we have seen of it. If we are careless, if we fail to maintain personal precautions, we will see further waves, whether you have them as third, fourth, or whatever.
Okay.
Doesn't matter.
All right, Mr. Agarwal, also, given the fact that a lot of people would be vaccinated, I'm guessing if the timeline is correct, then probably by the end of this year or so, is there a possibility that the virus will thrive, then will look for perfect host and will not find host in adults, vaccinated adults, and then infect children? Is that also a possibility?
So you're right in one way, but let me clarify the meaning of that. Children will remain relatively immune to severe disease. The virus has not changed that much. The risk of an individual child of getting infected and then getting severe disease will continue to be low. However, the proportions of children infected versus older people will increase. So you will see a few cases of severely ill children. That is what you would expect, because that's the population that's unvaccinated. But you will not see a huge number of severely sick children, which is what the perception becomes when people talk about waves and children infections. Just trying to separate that misconception.
Also, Dr. Anurag Agarwal says that like all viruses, this virus too will burn out eventually after infecting many people in a short duration. And will India then see the end of the second wave? Yes, is what Dr. Anurag Agarwal says. He says sometime by the middle of June or end of June, there will be a nationwide complete decline of the second wave. Listen in. Do you think that we are past our peak as far as the entire nation is concerned? I know it's difficult to, talk about India as a nation because different areas seem to be seeing a peak in cases. What do you think? Is there going to be a possibility of the second wave declining by June end or so? Because that is what one of the mathematical projections seem to suggest.
Let me say what we are confident about, and that is that the second wave, which is similar to any other highly transmissible variant wave, will be narrower and higher. That's obvious, right? I mean, you infect more people in a shorter time, and then you burn out of fuel, so you start coming down. Now, going by about half in terms of, width and, double or more in terms of height, yes, it does appear that by the end of June, almost all of India will be in a declining phase, might even be by mid the decline. But the northeast part, it depends on connectedness of a country. So the most connected part of the country will certainly fall into that category. Less connected parts of the country that get it late might be the exception, but then they will not create a peak. They will be kind of lengthening the tail. So I would imagine a fat tail, but definitely on the decline by mid to late June.
By mid-June is what you're saying.
By mid to late June, I would expect to see most parts of India in decline, only a little bit of a fat tail persisting. And this, you never want to have famous last words.
Okay.
These are subject to people maintaining reasonable precautions. We did not control this peak in Delhi only because the virus can no longer find people to infect. We achieved it through a combination of lockdown and other measures, which will not continue indefinitely. So as the country opens up, you will see a broadening of the peak, followed by the decline, which is why mid to late June is a very reasonable estimate by the mathematical modeling group, and subject to people maintaining at least care with masking. I think we will definitely achieve it.
All right, a lot of us use our cars to travel to work and elsewhere. While we try to keep our homes neat and clean, sometimes our cars do get neglected. So how do we keep our cars virus-free and do so easily? This is news you can use. Take a look. Do you use your car very often during COVID pandemic but forget about those nasty viruses hovering around? We will tell you exactly what you are supposed to do in such a situation. Here's how you can sanitize and take care of the interiors of your car during the lockdown. Do prioritize disinfecting areas that are frequently touched. These surfaces can be the rear view mirror, gear shift knobs, infotainment and dashboard controls, seats and armrests, seat belts and the handbrake. Isopropyl alcohol is a proven disinfectant. It is also safe to use on most hard interior surfaces. It can be used to remove many stains, smudges and residues as well as kill bacteria and viruses. Use soap and water on leather as isopropyl alcohol may cause problems with the leather. So stick to warm water and soap for any leather interiors. No need to scrub too hard. Avoid excess soap and water and use a microfiber cloth if possible to avoid scratches. Don't use too much water inside your car, particularly around electronics. Also, the right way to clean the car now or in any situation would be to put on some gloves. It's a good idea to keep a bottle of hand sanitizer or wipes in the storage space of the car. As soon as you get into the car and before you touch anything, sanitize your hands. Cleaning first ensures you're removing dirt, organic matter and many germs from surfaces, allowing the disinfectant to do its job on the more harmful stubborn germs. Most of these products are great for your vehicles but are recommended to be handled with proper protection. Over 11,000 cases of black fungus or mucormycosis and counting. As India is battling this epidemic, science and data could hold the key to understanding the infection, assuming epidemic proportions now. Could excessive steam be the reason, or India's hot, humid climate be a factor? What are studies suggesting? Take a look. Several studies have been done around black fungus, each one of them opening up a plethora of possibilities surrounding this infection. The first series on black fungus mucormycosis done by Professor V.P. Pandey in Indore on 210 patients. Interestingly, it reveals while antibiotics was used in 100% patients, steroids, the suspected culprit behind the increase in cases of this infection, was used only in 14% of the patients. 21% of them were not even diabetic. Interestingly, zinc supplement intake was not checked. Clearly, there are factors beyond steroid use and diabetes here. The obvious question is, what other forms of treatment did these patients receive? Experts are now even saying excessive steam inhalation, a widespread practice in India, could be one of the reasons.
High temperature steam in large amounts taken excessively can damage the mucosa or the lining of the airways, and this has already been documented. One must be careful in doing over-enthusiastic steam inhalation.
Burns caused 10 to 20% of past mucormycosis in India, say experts. Trauma to skin or mucous membrane can trigger invasive fungal infection in the right settings. Experts are now saying that potential offenders that must be looked for in studies is the concurrent use of antibiotics, which is not required in viral infections like COVID-19. Azithromycin, doxycycline, even carbapenems are seen on prescriptions. Antibiotics are known to increase the risk of fungal infections. Predictors of hospital-acquired bacterial and fungal superinfections in COVID-19, a prospective observational study done by Professor Marco Falcone from Italy, University of Pisa, says the same. Also, a research paper called Epidemiology of Mucormycosis in India says that incidence of mucormycosis has over the years increased in the country. This has been published in the medical journal Microorganisms. It says that the computational model-based method estimated a prevalence of 14 cases per 1 lakh individuals in India. The incidence seems to have grown amid the COVID-19 pandemic. The black fungus infections went up 2.5 times last year between September and December across 16 centers in the country. Another research, Diabetics and Metabolic Syndrome, suggests the unholy trinity of diabetes, rampant use of corticosteroid, along with COVID-19 that appears to increase the occurrence of mucormycosis, a rare black fungus infection.
In this paper, we have collated data of all the cases of mucormycosis in the world, starting from beginning of the COVID-19 epidemic. We have found 101 cases, out of which 82 cases are from India. So India already, before COVID-19, India already had lot more cases of COVID-19 than rest of the world. There were further highlights from this paper. Number one, that it is seen more in males, 80% in the males. Also, steroids are much talked about, but the steroids were not given in all the patients. Only 80% of the patients received steroid, 20% did not. Diabetes, which is also much talked about, was present in only 80% of the cases. Also, diabetes with very severely high blood sugar, ketoacidosis, was present in 15% of the cases.
Mortality was noted in 30.7% of the cases. Globally, the prevalence of mucormycosis varied from 0.005 to 1.7 per million population, while its prevalence in India is 80 times higher, which is 0.14 per 1,000 in India, compared to developed countries as per a recent estimate. In New Delhi, Sneha Mordani for India Today. All right, that's it in this edition of COVID 360. Until next time, be safe. Take care.